Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Scott Gerber is with us today. He's an ONU law professor. We're talking about the newest term of the U.S. Supreme Court, which began on Monday. I did see a headline that said guns, God, and abortion. Am I oversimplifying things there, or is that kind of what's in the purview?
Those are the big three so far.
Yeah. What do you think about when you see those at the top of the docket?
Yeah, well, the big one, of course, is going to be whether Roe v. Wade will be overruled. But before we get into that, just a couple quick points for context. One, this is the first full term with the court's current composition, which is 6-3 conservative. Two, it starts in the backdrop with the Democrats calling for court packing, potentially with the Biden commission on that. And then three, they have a new approach this term to oral argument, which means Justice Thomas will likely ask more questions. So that's just a little bit of background before we get into the case.
As you said, decidedly conservative. So I think a lot of people are thinking some history, in a sense, could be made. And one of those you mentioned was abortion and Roe v. Wade. Do you have thoughts on what might happen there? I know they've already weighed in on the case out of Texas.
Yeah, the case on the docket is out of Mississippi. A Mississippi law prohibits abortion after the 15th week of pregnancy, except in instances of medical emergencies or fetal abnormalities. And in Roe, the court held in 1973 that the states cannot prohibit abortions before viability. So the state of Mississippi, in its merits brief, argued that, quote, the conclusion that abortion is a constitutional right has no basis in text, structure, history, or tradition. And they're asking the court to overrule Roe and the case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which occurred in 2002, that reaffirmed Roe.
I know it's tough to look into the crystal ball, but do you get a sense of what's going to happen in these kind of cases?
It's going to turn on how vigorously the current conservative justices oppose Roe. And, you know, Justice Thomas has literally said in prior separate opinions to overrule Roe. But that doesn't mean that 5 other people might say the same thing. I think Alito would say the same thing, for example. But they wanted Roe overruled in the Casey case in 2002 as well, and the court didn't do it because, in particular, the reliance interest that a generation of women had placed on the right to choose. And we're now 2 decades in addition to that. So Roe is about 50 years old. So to overrule a case that's 50 years old when the court has repeatedly reaffirmed it would be quite dramatic.
You mentioned, too, gun rights is also, no pun intended, in the crosshairs. What do you think is going to happen there? Tell us about that case.
Yeah, and so in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, Heller versus District of Columbia, ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to bear arms. So that was a huge victory for gun owners. The New York statute at issue this term restricts carrying a concealed weapon outside the home to instances where a person can show a need to do so for self-defense. And given how many of the conservatives in their opinions on the Supreme Court or as Court of Appeals judges have expressed strong support for protecting gun rights and limiting government regulation of firearms, on that one, I think the court's going to strike the New York limitation on gun rights.
Another case that we've talked about, religion also being talked about a lot. One case talked about whether governments and funding could be discriminated against schools basically that had a religious background. Is that one of those cases, and do you feel like more of those will be kind of lumped in?
Yeah, there's a case on the docket that'll be argued on December 8th called Carson versus Macon, and it involves areas of Maine that are too rural to support public schools. So the Maine government, through school administrative units, provides parents funds to send their children to private schools, but it cannot be to private religious schools. So the issue in that case is whether this refusal violates the free exercise of religion. And in light of last year's decision in Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, in which the court ruled 5-4 that tax credited funded scholarships meant to help students attend private schools cannot exclude religious institutions simply because they are religious. In light of that precedent from just last year, I think that the Maine law will be struck as a violation of free exercise of religion. And another major case that might come up is revisiting the issue of the use of race in college and university admissions. The court has upheld the practice in the past, ruling that schools can consider a student's race as one factor in the admissions process. But with its more conservative makeup, the current court may not agree. And the case in the pipeline involves Harvard University allegedly discriminating against students of Asian American descent. The lower courts so far have ruled for Harvard, but again, given the composition of the U.S. Supreme Court, if the court takes that case, many feel that they'll take it to finally end the use of race, ethnicity, et cetera, in higher education admissions decisions.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Dr. Gerber, thank you so much for summarizing that for us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Jeff.
You bet. Nice talking with you. We'll be back after this.